St. James always seemed to me like an island of stability, a small town where time appeared to stand still and everything followed its measured, familiar course. This was where my childhood unfolded, where I grew up dreaming of a future that would be as steady as the bus schedule at the town square and as joyful as the first days of spring. When I met Noah, my dreams suddenly took shape. He was older, wiser, more self-assured. I saw in him a person who could become my rock, and in our future together, a cozy home, warm evenings, and cheerful family celebrations. He embodied everything I thought happiness should be: reliable, confident, predictable. He had an adult son from his first marriage, Jamie. At the start of our story, that seemed like just a small detail in the bigger picture. Our marriage became the beginning I had been waiting for so long. I tried to be the perfect wife, supporting Noah, taking care of our home, and being involved in his life so that he would never feel alone. With Jamie, I worked to build a warm relationship, though he lived in New York, far from us. We rarely saw each other, but I remembered him as a teenager, quiet and a little withdrawn. It was hard to imagine that this young man would ever be more than just a background figure in the new family portrait I was creating. With Noah, I felt like I was part of something meaningful, something important. My life gained the stability I had been yearning for. But beneath that surface, there was always something I tried not to think about. A part of me missed the days when I dreamed of something that was mine alone, something bigger than just family bliss. At times, it felt like I was locked inside a painting, where I was merely one of the elements, not the centerpiece. But this was just a faint echo, one I silenced by reminding myself that I had found what I'd been searching for. And then one day, the news arrived. Jamie was coming back to help us prepare for the wedding. I had no idea that this would mark the beginning of an entirely different story. Jamie arrived unexpectedly, a few days earlier than planned. I heard his voice at the door, and for some reason, my heart tightened for a brief moment. He was the same, yet entirely different. Years had passed since we last saw each other. Standing on the doorstep was a grown man, confident with a faint, knowing smile, as if he always held a secret that others did not. "Hello, Anna," he said, smiling and extending his hand. His voice was low and soft, and I felt a slight wave of unease ripple over my skin. "Hello, Jamie. Welcome," I replied, trying to sound casual. Noah embraced his son, patting him on the shoulder as if testing his strength, and immediately began asking about his trip, his work, and his plans. I stood a little apart, listening to their conversation. Everything seemed normal, but there was something in Jamie's eyes that unsettled me. A look that felt too intense, too probing, as though he saw more in me than just a stepmother. At dinner, I tried to focus on the conversation, on the familiar topics: Noah's work, the wedding preparations, life in New York. Jamie responded easily, joked, and told stories, but every time he looked at me, I felt my world shift slightly. His questions seemed to come not just out of politeness. "Anna, is this the life you always dreamed of?" he asked suddenly, meeting my gaze directly. "Or was it something different?" "What do you mean?" I pretended not to understand, though his question struck a nerve. "Just, sometimes people choose what feels right, rather than what they truly want." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of quiet intensity. "I have everything I ever wanted," I replied, striving to appear composed. Jamie smiled, as if my answer was one he'd heard before, but he said nothing more. That night, I couldn't sleep. His question echoed in my mind, forcing me to revisit thoughts I had always tried so hard to bury. Jamie's words, his confidence, even his manner of speaking, it all made me feel unsettled. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing. His return wasn't just a family reunion. It was the beginning of something I would have to face. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. A strange sense of unease lingered, refusing to let me rest. I decided to start the day with a cup of tea on the veranda. The morning air was crisp, and as I sipped the scalding tea, I tried to restore my inner balance. But thoughts of Jamie kept swirling in my mind like a broken record. Why had his words from the night before unsettled me so much? Hearing footsteps from inside the house, I turned around. Jamie. His hair was slightly tousled, and he wore a simple gray sweater, yet he still looked effortlessly composed. He paused in the doorway, looking at me with a faint smile. "Morning," he said softly, as though not wanting to disturb the quiet of the hour. "Good morning," I replied, trying not to reveal my thoughts. "You're up early." "Habit. In New York, I'm always up by 6. He sat down across from me, his gaze piercing and direct once again. "Do you always wake up this early?" "Sometimes. I love this time of day. It's so peaceful." I took another sip of tea. "Are you truly happy, Anna?" he asked suddenly, as if continuing the conversation from the previous evening. I looked at him, trying to decipher the source of his insistence on such questions. Was he provoking me? Testing my resolve? But his face remained serious, devoid of any irony. "Jamie, why are you so interested?" I asked at last, striving to keep my voice calm, though I felt turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. "I just think you deserve more," he said, turning his gaze toward the garden. "Sometimes people hide behind what seems right instead of what they really want. I know this from experience. I'm happy with your father." My voice was firmer than I had expected. "And please, let's not talk about this anymore." He nodded, but I caught a fleeting shadow of disappointment in his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood up, taking my cup, and headed back into the house, feeling his gaze follow me all the way. At breakfast, Noah was in his usual energetic mode, talking about the day's plans, finishing the guest list, ironing out restaurant details, and finalizing the wedding decor. I tried to focus, jotting down his ideas in a notebook, but occasionally I caught Jamie quietly watching me. He said little, only occasionally interjecting a word or two into the conversation. "Anna, you're so busy," he said suddenly, as Noah stepped away to take a phone call. "Everything seems so perfect." "Well, wedding preparations are always like this," I replied with a smile. "A lot of hustle and bustle." "And what about after?" His voice was soft, yet there was an unmistakable undertone. I didn't have a chance to respond. Noah returned, and the conversation shifted to flower arrangements for the ceremony. But something inside me faltered. These questions, why did they make me feel as though I was somehow failing? After all, I was just living my life. By evening, during family dinner, the atmosphere grew even more charged. Jamie remained calm as usual, but every movement, every word seemed to carry a subtle hint that left me uneasy. When he told stories about life in New York, he often directed them toward me, as if seeking my reaction rather than his father's. "You once wanted to visit New York, didn't you?" he asked as we finished dessert. "Yes," I nodded, avoiding his gaze. "But it never quite worked out." "You'd like it there," he said with a faint smile. "You'd see life in a completely different way." "Jamie, leave Anna alone." Noah laughed, oblivious to the way his son was looking at me. "She's doing perfectly fine right here." I smiled, pretending to agree. But inside, everything felt as though it were turning upside down. I couldn't understand what was happening, but the feeling that something was slipping out of my control grew stronger with every passing moment. Every look from Jamie, every word, felt like it carried an invisible weight. And I couldn't shake the sense that it mattered far more to me than it should. It all started with a simple request. The next day, Jamie suggested we drive to the old cabin by the lake. He explained that there were a few things left there that his father had asked him to bring back. Noah, busy with endless calls about the wedding, eagerly agreed. "You can go with him, Anna," he said without looking up from his laptop. "It'll be a nice change of pace. All we've been talking about is the wedding. Jamie will show you around." I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but I couldn't refuse. The trip promised to be straightforward and casual. A bit of driving, a bit of conversation, a bit of reminiscing. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. We drove in silence until the city streets gave way to a winding country road. Jamie seemed calm, too calm. I stared out the window, trying not to think about how awkward it felt to be alone with him. My inner voice kept insisting this was just a trip. Just a simple trip. Have you been here before? He asked suddenly, breaking the silence. No, I replied. Noah mentioned this place meant a lot to you. It did. We used to come here every summer when I was a kid. It was our refuge. He paused for a moment, then added, I miss those days. Everything was simpler then. I nodded, unsure how to respond. His words, like everything he said, carried a subtle sadness. We arrived at the cabin an hour later. It stood by the edge of the lake, surrounded by pines with a wooden porch and a weathered roof. The whole scene was steeped in nostalgia. Here it is, Jamie said as he parked the car. It hasn't changed a bit. We stepped out, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The air was fresh and clean. The water lapped gently at the shore. I wandered closer to the lake while Jamie went inside the cabin. Want to take a look? He called from the doorway. I followed him in. The interior was simple. Old wooden walls, a small fireplace, a couple of chairs, and shelves filled with books. In the corner sat a box, likely the one Noah had mentioned. This is where we kept all our summer things, Jamie said, gesturing to the box. Noah asked me to grab some albums and a few old records. I sat down in one of the chairs while he sorted through the box. His voice was almost serene, but I sensed something personal in his tone, as if this place had awakened forgotten emotions in him. Did you always dream of this kind of life? He asked again, looking up at me. That question seemed to be his refrain. He asked it as if searching for a different answer, one I hadn't yet given. Why does it matter to you? I asked, trying to sound firm, though he was throwing me off balance once more. Because I liked you better as someone else, Anna, he said, his voice calm but charged with intensity that made me freeze. The person you were before you became part of this perfect picture. I didn't immediately understand what he meant. He sat across from me, his gaze unyielding. I remember how you used to dream, he continued. How you talked about your plans, the life you wanted to build. But now it's like you've forgotten yourself. It's none of your business, Jamie, I said. I have a family, and I'm happy. Do you really believe that? His eyes bore into mine with such piercing clarity that I felt something inside me crack. Or are you just telling yourself that? The silence between us became almost tangible. I stood, intending to leave the cabin, but he was suddenly next to me. His words echoed in my mind. I saw him open his mouth as if to say something more, but he stopped and simply looked at me. You deserve to be yourself, Anna, he said softly. I took a step back, avoiding his gaze, and walked out onto the porch. The fresh air helped me regain my composure. I heard him move behind me, but he said nothing more. Only the quiet of the lake surrounded us. The sun was slowly setting beyond the horizon, painting the sky above the lake in warm shades of gold and pink. I sat on the steps of the porch, gazing at the still surface of the water that mirrored the sunset like a perfect reflection. Inside, I felt a strange mix of emptiness and fullness, as though the conversations with Jamie today had unearthed something I had long kept buried. He stepped onto the porch, holding 2 glasses of water, and sat down beside me without a word. For a while, we sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. My mind was crowded with questions, but I didn't want to ask any of them. It felt like any words would shatter the fragile moment hanging between us. Have you often been happy? He asked suddenly, his gaze fixed on the lake. I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. His question was simple, yet it carried a depth I hadn't anticipated. Yes, I suppose, I said after a pause. Everyone has those moments, don't they? Moments, sure, but what about the rest of it? He turned to me, his eyes calm yet filled with an intensity that made me feel exposed, as if he could see everything I was trying to hide. Jamie, you think too much, I said, trying to deflect. Life isn't always about happiness. Sometimes it's just about being with the people you love. Love? He repeated the word as if weighing it. Or just being used to them? His words hit me like an arrow. I lowered my gaze, feeling something rise within me that I couldn't control. I wanted to respond, to say something that would prove him wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, maybe he was right. At that moment, he reached out, placing his hand lightly on the railing of the porch beside me. The gesture was so subtle it was almost imperceptible, but I felt his presence as though it were louder than any words. You've always been someone special to me, Anna, he said softly, his eyes locked on mine. Even when I was a teenager, I saw the way you lived, the way you shone, and that feeling hasn't left me. It's not just a memory, it's still here. Jamie, I began, but he interrupted me. You've changed. I see it. But I still feel that the Anna I knew is somewhere inside you, just hiding. And I can't stop thinking about that. I didn't know what to say. His words were so genuine, so heartfelt that I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't let myself. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was happy in my life, that I wasn't the person he thought I was. But instead, I remained silent. And then it happened. We kissed. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible motion, but inside me, it unleashed a storm of emotions. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget everything. Noah, the house, the wedding, everything that was supposed to hold me in place. When he pulled back, I sat still, frozen. He looked at me, waiting for a response, but I simply stood, feeling the turmoil within me tearing me apart. We need to go back, I whispered, avoiding his gaze. Anna. He started to say something, but I was already descending the steps and heading toward the car. The drive back was silent. Neither of us spoke, but the air between us was thick with something undeniable. I knew that night would change everything, but I had no idea how I would live with it. The next few days, I did my best to avoid Jamie. We only saw each other at the family table, and I made a concerted effort to shield myself from his gaze, but it was far harder than I had anticipated. Every time he was near, I felt a tightening within me, a sensation I couldn't ignore. On the third day after our trip to the lake, Jamie knocked on the door to my room. I knew I couldn't just leave it unanswered, but every instinct screamed at me not to open it. When I finally swung the door open, he stood there, his expression resolute, making it clear that the conversation was inevitable. We need to talk, he said softly but firmly. I nodded silently and stepped into the living room. We sat across from each other, and I braced myself for what he was about to say. I expected him to apologize or attempt to explain what had happened, but his words were nothing like what I anticipated. Anna, I can't keep pretending everything is fine, he began, his eyes locking onto mine. I can't stand by and watch you live a life that isn't yours. I want to be with you. The words hit me like a thunderclap. I was utterly unprepared. I didn't know how to respond. My heart pounded so loudly that I was sure he could hear it. Jamie, do you even realize what you're saying? I finally managed to say. This is impossible. You're Noah's son. We can't. Noah deserves honesty, he interrupted. And so do you. You're trying to convince yourself that you're happy, but I see the way you look at me, Anna. We both know this is more than just a mistake. You don't understand what you're saying, I repeated, trying to maintain my composure. There can't be anything between us. I love your father. He shook his head, as if unwilling to accept my words. Love or obligation? He asked. You deserve to live the life you want. We can leave, start over. Somewhere no one knows us. Just say yes. I stared at him, feeling my resolve crumble under the weight of his words. You don't understand what you're saying, I repeated, weaker this time. I do, Anna, he said, his voice unwavering. I know we both want this. and I'm willing to give up everything for you. Just tell me you feel the same. I closed my eyes, feeling an internal war rage within me. One part of me clinging to stability and safety, the other yearning to break free from this invisible cage. The sincerity in his eyes only made it harder. I need time, I whispered, standing up. I need to think. Jamie rose as well, but didn't try to stop me. He simply nodded and said quietly, I'll wait. But not forever. I retreated to my room, closing the door behind me and leaning against it. My heart felt impossibly heavy, and my mind was a chaotic storm. I knew that whatever decision I made would change everything, and none of the choices felt right. The night passed restlessly. I barely slept, tossing and turning, replaying Jamie's words over and over in my mind. His proposal sounded implausible, even absurd, yet a part of my soul responded to it. A warm echo of something I hadn't felt in so long. But that warmth quickly gave way to fear. What was I doing? How could I even entertain the thought of destroying everything Noah and I had built together? By morning, I felt drained. My mind was a blank slate, but I knew I had to make a decision. The situation had already spiraled beyond silent avoidance. I needed to put an end to it before it went any further. Jamie was waiting for me in the kitchen. He sat at the table, idly stirring his coffee. When I entered, he looked up, and in his eyes, I saw something that made me hesitate for a moment. Hope. That hope only made everything harder. Good morning, he said, as if nothing had happened. But his voice was too calm, almost cautious. We need to talk, I said, avoiding his gaze. About what you said yesterday. He nodded and pushed his coffee cup aside. His full attention was on me, and it made me feel exposed. I've thought about it a lot, Jamie, I began, taking a deep breath. And I can't. I can't do this to Noah. He deserves better. He loves me, and I faltered, searching for the words. I can't betray him. This isn't about him, Anna, Jamie interrupted, his voice harder now. This is about you, about what you want. And I want to be honest, I said, more firmly than I expected. Honest with myself and with him. This is wrong, Jamie, all of it. We've gone too far, and I don't want to ruin his life, or yours. He was silent for a long time, and I couldn't tell what was going through his mind. Finally, he stood up, slowly, with a strange sense of resignation. I knew you'd say that, he said quietly. But you know, sometimes the truth isn't what we say. It's what we feel. Jamie, please. I didn't know what else to say. All I wanted was to end this endless internal struggle. I understand, he said, turning away. You want to go back to your life, to be with him, to be the Anna everyone expects you to be. His words were full of pain, but he didn't argue. He simply accepted it, and for some reason, that hurt more than if he had fought me. I just wanted you to be happy, he added, glancing at me over his shoulder. Even if it's not with me. With that, he left the room, leaving me alone. I stood frozen, feeling a hollow emptiness growing inside me. The decision was made, and it should have brought relief. Instead, I felt shattered. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to focus on wedding preparations and routine tasks, but every time his words came back to me, my resolve wavered. Yet I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't betray Noah. He didn't deserve that kind of pain, even if it meant I would never know what life with Jamie could have been. Noah suggested a short family trip to the seaside. We need a break before the wedding, he said cheerfully, clearly happy that Jamie was still with us. I couldn't refuse, even though the thought of spending a few days so close to Jamie felt almost unbearable. The cottage we rented stood right by the shore. The wind carried the smell of salt and seaweed, and the waves crashed rhythmically against the beach, as if trying to soothe the storm within me. But peace eluded me. Jamie remained distant, barely looking at me, and somehow his aloofness made his presence even more palpable. The three of us pretended it was just a normal family trip. On the third evening, after the sun had set and the warm glow of streetlights bathed the beach, Noah suggested staying in to watch a movie. I excused myself, claiming I was tired, and stepped outside to get some fresh air. The sand beneath my feet was cool, and the sound of the waves reminded me of childhood, of simpler times when everything seemed easier. Do you always run away when things get hard? A voice called from behind me. I turned around. Jamie stood a few steps away, his face illuminated by the faint light of the moon. His expression carried something I couldn't decipher. I'm not running, I replied, trying to stay calm. I just want to be alone. Are you convincing me or yourself? He stepped closer, his words quiet but cutting. Because I can see how hard you're trying to pretend. Stop it, Jamie, I said, taking a step back. We've already talked about this. I've made my choice. You made a choice, but you're not happy, he said, his gaze unwavering. I see it every time you look at me. That's not true, I whispered, feeling my voice start to tremble. You're wrong. He was silent. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he stepped closer. Only a few feet separated us now. His eyes were warm but filled with pain. Anna, I'll leave if you tell me that's what you truly want. I'll disappear from your life and never come back. But say it honestly. Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't feel the same way I do. I wanted to answer. I wanted to say firmly and clearly that none of this was true, that he was mistaken. But I couldn't. I looked at him, and every word caught in my throat. My eyes betrayed me, and in that moment I realized I couldn't lie anymore. The waves lapped softly at our feet, as if urging us toward each other. And then, we kissed. I didn't pull away. When he finally did, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. This can't happen again, Jamie, I whispered, unable to meet his gaze. We can't keep doing this. He was silent for a long time before nodding, his face shadowed by something dark and heavy. I've heard that before, he said, his voice hollow. But you keep coming back to me. He turned and walked back to the house, leaving me standing alone on the beach. The sound of the waves no longer soothed me. Instead, they echoed destruction, the rhythm of something I could no longer control. Returning to the house after that night on the beach was agonizing. I spent the entire evening in my room, avoiding both Jamie and Noah. It felt as if the walls of the house had grown unbearably close, the air too thick to breathe. We continued living under the same roof, pretending that nothing had happened, but the pretense was suffocating. The next day, Noah's sister, Laura, arrived to visit. Laura was sharp-eyed and perceptive, the kind of person who always seemed to see more than you wanted her to. She quickly picked up on the tension between Jamie and me. Her scrutinizing glances and silent questions left me on edge. That evening, as everyone gathered in the living room, Laura suggested a walk along the boardwalk. Hoping a change of scenery might help calm my nerves, I agreed. But the walk turned out to be far from the peaceful escape I had imagined. Anna, you look well, but I must say you don't seem at ease, she began as we stepped onto the quiet street. Is everything all right? Of course, I replied too quickly for it to sound believable. Laura stopped and turned to me, studying my face as if trying to read something hidden there. I know something's going on between you and Jamie, she said at last. Don't make me guess, Anna. I'll find out one way or another. I froze, unable to find the words to respond. You're mistaken, I finally managed to say. There's nothing going on. She shook her head, her eyes never leaving mine. Anna, I saw you and Jamie on the beach. I saw the way he looked at you, and how you looked at him. Her voice turned cold. Do you understand what you're doing? I remained silent, my throat tight with an unspeakable lump. She stepped closer, her expression hardening. You're about to destroy everything Noah has, she continued. And for what? For that boy who doesn't even understand what it means to be a man? It's not that simple, I began, But Laura cut me off. It is simple, Anna. You made a choice. You married Noah. He trusts you, and you're betraying him. Her words pierced me like an arrow. I knew she was right. I tried to think of something to say, to justify myself, but no words came. Guilt and pain gripped my heart. When we returned to the house, Laura went straight to Noah. I watched them talking in the kitchen, her face serious, his shifting from confusion to concern. After a few minutes, Noah walked into the living room and looked at me. In his eyes was the one thing I had dreaded most: doubt. Anna, we need to talk, he said quietly. My chest tightened as I followed him into the study. He closed the door and sat across from me. His face was hard, but his voice remained calm. Laura told me something upsetting, he began, and I want to hear the truth from you. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. All I could do was sit in silence, looking into his eyes as they searched for answers. Anna, I love you, he continued. But if you've betrayed me with my son, I don't know if I can forgive that. His words crashed down on me like an avalanche. I tried to speak, but the lump in my throat choked me. Finally, I could only shake my head and lower my gaze. That was answer enough. Noah stood, his face pale. He paced the room before turning back to me. I'm packing my things, he said. When I leave, I won't be coming back. He walked out, leaving me in absolute silence. Moments later, I heard the front door slam. Jamie was gone too. When I stepped into the living room, the house was empty. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of true, crushing silence descend upon me. The house, once so full of life, was now steeped in oppressive silence. Rooms that had echoed with voices and laughter felt somber and empty. I was alone, and the solitude was deafening. The silence didn't just surround me, it screamed. Noah had left immediately after our conversation. He packed a few belongings and said nothing more. His gaze had been cold, and I knew something inside him had broken, something I might never be able to fix. Jamie had gone too. I tried to find him, but he had vanished as abruptly as he had entered my life. The only trace of him left in the hallway were his forgotten boots, a stark reminder of how quickly everything had fallen apart. Laura arrived the next morning, determined to ensure I understood the gravity of what I had done. Her words were sharp, like a slap across the face. You made your choice, Anna, she said coldly. But I never thought you were capable of this, of destroying everything my brother worked so hard to build. Did you think about anyone but yourself? Laura, I began, but she raised a hand to stop me. I don't want your excuses, she snapped. And I don't want your apologies. Just know this. I never want to see you again. You've destroyed it all on your own. When she left, I stood by the door, feeling as if the ground beneath me had turned to quicksand. Everyone was gone. My husband, his son, his family. The life I had so carefully constructed lay in ruins. I was left alone with this crushing, all-consuming silence. Days passed, but I couldn't gather my thoughts. I drifted through the empty house like a ghost, unable to find peace. Everywhere I looked, I was confronted by reminders of what I'd lost, but they offered no comfort. Instead, each item, a photo on the wall, a mug in the kitchen, the lingering scent of his cologne in the bedroom, felt like a wound, each one reminding me of what was gone. I tried writing to Noah, but every message remained unsent. What could I say? That I was sorry? That it had all been a mistake? But even if I said those things, I knew words wouldn't undo what had happened. I thought about Jamie, wondering where he was and how he felt. He hadn't said a word before leaving. He hadn't fought, hadn't made promises. He had simply walked away. I couldn't blame him for that. But his silence felt like the loudest condemnation of all. One evening, I packed my things and left for a small apartment in another city. It was a spontaneous decision, but I realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. It was soaked in memories that cut too deep. I rented a modest place with no trace of the past. A new city, new walls, a new life. But even there, the silence followed me. I didn't know how to begin again. Each day stretched endlessly, and the nights were even worse. In the dark, my mind returned to what I had done, what I had lost, and what could never be reclaimed. Over time, I came to understand that the world I had destroyed could not be rebuilt. All I had left were the ruins, from which I would have to construct something new. But in those early days, I had no idea how to do that. And the most frightening part was that I wasn't even sure if I wanted to try. Months passed, but the pain that had followed me since the day everything fell apart didn't fade. I lived in a small apartment, surrounded by the bare essentials. The new city brought no comfort. It was merely a backdrop to the emptiness inside. At times, I felt like a shadow of my former self, moving through days shrouded in fog. I found a job at a small art gallery. The work was monotonous, but it gave me something to focus on, a temporary reprieve from my thoughts. Evenings, however, were the hardest. Alone with my memories, they washed over me like relentless waves, breaking the fragile balance I tried so hard to maintain. Faces from the past. Noah's smile, Jamie's gaze, Laura's words, returned over and over. I tried to rebuild myself. I read books, kept a journal, and occasionally walked along the river. But each time I felt like I was moving forward, something would remind me of what I had lost. Simple things, a song Noah loved, or the light of a sunset resembling the one at the lake house, would bring back the bitterness. I was learning to live with the pain, but I couldn't yet say I was overcoming it. One day, I found a letter in my mailbox. A plain white envelope, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly. Jamie. I sat on the couch, holding the letter for a long time, too afraid to open it. When I finally did, my hands trembled. Inside was a single page, written in his familiar, even script. Anna, I've thought for a long time about whether I should write to you. At first, I wanted to forget everything that happened, but I realized I couldn't. We both destroyed what was around us. Perhaps we can never fix it. But I want you to know, I don't regret what I felt for you. It was real, even if it was wrong. Now, we're on different paths, and maybe that's for the best. But you must move forward. Build something for yourself. Something true. You've always known how to do that, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Goodbye, Jamie. I read the letter over and over, and each time the tears came harder. His words were a farewell, but there was something more. A reminder that my life wasn't over, even if it felt that way. Slowly, I began to move forward. My new world was far from what I had imagined, but it was mine. I learned to accept my mistakes as part of myself, as something that had shaped who I was. It was a painful process, but it was necessary. I still think about Noah. Sometimes I want to write to him, but I know it wouldn't be right. He deserves happiness, and I must learn to let him go. I think about Jamie less, but his letter was a turning point. It gave me the push I couldn't find within myself. Now, when I look at my reflection in the mirror, I see someone different. Not the perfect Anna who tried to please everyone, and not the broken woman left in the aftermath of it all. I see someone who has learned to live again. And maybe, just maybe, this is only the beginning.